In 2024, Sam Bankman-Fried was sentenced to 25 years in prison after committing one of the largest financial frauds of the 21st century. But what motivates someone to steal $11 billion? Journalist David Morris calls his book on Bankman-Fried a work of, quote, forensic philosophy. He goes beyond the facts of the case to describe the increasingly popular ideologies of techno-utopianism, libertarian idealism, and utilitarianism. And he argues that Silicon Valley's imagination of the future puts our democracy at risk in the present. Coming up on Afterwards, journalist David Morris talks about his book, Stealing the Future, Sam Bankman-Fried, Elite Fraud, and the Cult of Techno-Utopia. This is Afterwards from C-SPAN. This week, journalist David Morris talks about the fallen cryptocurrency mogul, Sam Bankman-Fried. He sat down with journalist Benjamin Schiller at POWERHOUSE Arena in New York City in November of 2025.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Great to be here.
I'm gonna work on that positioning.
Great to be here. Thanks all for coming, and welcome to our listeners and viewers at home. So David, you and I have worked together, I think, off and off for maybe 10 years.
Something on that order.
Something like that. Breaker Magazine
Yeah.
was an early crypto publication, and then at CoinDesk, as our introducer was saying, broke the story of Sam Bankman-Fried 3 years ago. So it's been almost exactly 3 years to the day that he was...
Exactly, in fact, November 11th, 2022 was when the exchange closed down for withdrawals. So we're exactly at the... Took me a second. Sorry, I'm recognizing people in the audience. 3 years exactly to the collapse and closure.
Right, so and it took about a year for him to be prosecuted and then sentenced to prison for 25 years, and he's currently in federal penitentiary somewhere.
Yeah.
And he's been playing this game of presidential pardon with the Trump administration, which has been successful for some crypto criminals or people who went to prison, but not so far for S.B.F.
And I think unlikely to be successful for him for reasons that we can talk about at some point maybe, but I think he's probably going to do the whole bid. Right.
So we're going to get into why Sam Bankman-Fried really matters as a case in crypto and kind of the larger financial story of this country, the world. But first of all, you're going to give us a quick reading.
Yeah.
So
let's make this awkward transition.
I don't feel awkward. I think it feels very natural.
So first of all, thanks to everybody for being here. I have a lot of friends and family here. First and foremost, my wife, Georgia Hurtis, to whom the book is dedicated. My great good friend, Pam Bell, is out in the audience, came all the way from Florida. My parents are in here in the back. So I just want to open, I'm going to do one thing really quick and watch my time. So I want to read a section from Chapter 3. I'm going to start with the epigraphs from Chapter 3, which... Oh, sorry, I'm making you ride that. I'll keep it down here, I swear. So there are two quotes that open this third chapter. The first, Sam will never speak an untruth. It's just not in him. Barbara Fried, quoted in the New Yorker, 25th September 2023. Second epigraph, quote, I did not think it a fruitful use of time to spell out every time I thought Mr. Bankman-Fried testified willfully and knowingly falsely at trial. There are more than the ones I've articulated, but that suffices. I've been doing this job for close to 30 years. I've never seen a performance quite like that. Judge Lewis Kaplan, 28th March, 2024. Skipping ahead a little bit. So, one of the frames for the book and the ways that I present some of the events that happened was him doing various interviews after the collapse. And one of the main ones was with Andrew Ross Sorkin at the New York Times Deal Book Summit, where he lied a lot. And we're going to talk about one of those. This subsection is, it's a margin trading platform. When he began to attempt an actual explanation of events for Sorkin and the Deal Book audience, Bankman-Fried unfurled the first truly strange lie, one that could absolve him of guilt if true, but which was, to anyone paying even moderate attention, obviously false. Quote, Alameda Research did have a long leveraged position on FTX, Bankman-Fried told Sorkin, and the international platform, it's a margin trading platform. After he delivered this explanation, Sam's downcast eyes darted up to barely glance into the camera, eyes that were not cowed, but sharply observant. He seemed to be gauging Sorkin and the audience's reaction from afar, while doing his best to appear supplicant and contrite. Peeking from behind the hair was a Sam Bankman-Fried the public had never really seen. The Sam who was relentlessly focused on his goals and willing to do anything to win. In essence, Bankman-Fried was claiming that Alameda Research had legitimately borrowed billions of dollars from FTX customers, the long position, then lost it in bad trades, which he was very sorry for not paying attention to. This explanation, it would later emerge, had been concocted as a plausible fiction by an FTX lawyer at Sam's request. It was an obvious lie, even if it might slip past people who have spent their lives worrying about things more important than finance. Margin trading is a service available on many kinds of asset trading platforms that allows traders to borrow money to make bets on assets. Margin is often used to go long or bet that an asset will go up in value. If a trader has only $1,000 of their own capital, they might be able to borrow another $1,000 to, for instance, buy $2,000 in Bitcoin. If Bitcoin goes up, the trader pays back the borrowed funds but gets to keep their gains. If Bitcoin goes down, on the other hand, their dollar collateral could be liquidated to cover the loan, doubling their losses. FTX did offer margin trading, and margin traders did consent to have their assets available for borrowing by other margin traders in exchange for interest payments. When Sam Bankman-Fried said that Alameda has a long position, he was admitting that the hedge fund was in debt to FTX customers. In his version of events, this borrowing was not illegal or even unethical. Instead, bad market timing was the ultimate culprit. As the crypto market tanked, Alameda's highly leveraged long crypto trades blew up or became worth less than the value of the loans, taking borrowed customer money with it. All of this was a wisp of reality draped across a pile of bullshit. In implying that Alameda had the clear right to borrow those customer funds simply because FTX was a margin trading platform, Bankman-Fried was speaking a very clear untruth. Forensic accountant Peter Easton would present evidence at trial showing that for the entirety of 2022, Alameda owed FTX billions more in assets than depositors had opted to lend through the margin program. At the peak in mid-2022, Alameda was borrowing $10.8 billion more in assets than were voluntarily enrolled in margin lending. Andrew Ross Sorkin immediately saw this for the lie that it was and read passages from FTX's terms of service to Bankman-Fried, which explicitly promised most customers that their funds would not be borrowed. These simple spot trading accounts without borrowing enabled made up the vast majority of FTX customers' activity and holdings. But Alameda had taken effectively 100% of customer funds, spot and margin, for its own long position. The spot customers hadn't agreed to that and didn't know it was happening. We now know the source of this strange, obviously false claim about margin borrowing. On 7th November 2022, as FTX was going up in flames, executives were launching a last-ditch effort to raise money, and Bankman-Fried was about to pitch investors at Apollo Global Management. This was a serious bunch, and they wanted financial statements. Things had progressed beyond the point of simply cooking the books. So Sam Bankman-Fried took then FTX General Counsel Ken Sun on a tense walk. Sun testified that Bankman-Fried asked him for, quote, a legal justification for why the funds were missing. Sun testified that he had only discovered the amount of money missing from FTX a few days before. When he asked for an explanation, Sun says he got very vague responses. That night, Sun saw head of engineering Nishad Singh, a confessed co-conspirator who saw the scheme collapsing. Quote, his entire face was pale, gray. It looked like his soul had been plucked away from him. Sun was already sure that, quote, there was no legal justification for the money being taken. Nonetheless, on that night of 7th November, Sun willingly laid out to Bankman-Fried what he called theoretical arguments that could explain the missing funds. This included the theoretical possibility that voluntary lending by margin traders accounted for the losses. This was not supported by the facts of what actually happened, and Sun testified that he made this clear to Bankman-Fried. Nonetheless, it became Bankman-Fried's unwavering version of events. He repeated it not only at DealBook, but to George Stephanopoulos in an interview on Good Morning America just weeks later in December 2022. Bankman-Fried's supporters would also implicitly and explicitly echo the untruth cooked up by Sun for years afterwards. This was the most central of Bankman-Fried's weird, compulsive, self-indicting lies. Like most of them, it contained a wildly inaccurate claim about basic principles of finance, accounting, or corporate structure. In this case, about how margin lending works. It's a genre of lies suggesting that Sam Bankman-Fried was not a Machiavellian mastermind, but in fact confoundingly inept, either confused and deluded enough to genuinely believe his own absurd explanations, or so alienated by the sense of his own unique brilliance that he couldn't grasp how obvious his lies were to the rest of us. Certain people, it's true, were eager to swallow these absurdities. In January 2024, months after Bankman-Fried's criminal conviction, Ivy League law professors Ian Ayres and John Donahue would leverage their reputations to assert essentially the same claim in a column titled, quote, "FTX was never really bankrupt." The pair argued that FTX was solvent, that, quote, it had enough assets to cover all liabilities to customers on the basis of its less liquid venture investments, like Anthropic. In other words, Ayres and Donahue echo Sam's implicit admission that he was gambling with customers' custodied funds, and they too treat that as perfectly acceptable. It was in hearing Bankman-Fried's strange, clumsy lies that I was first magnetically drawn to the question of what exactly was going on in his head. In his complete departures from reality, we begin to see that Bankman-Fried was neither simply hapless nor a figure of malicious evil, but a sick man, alienated from himself, twisted into knots of self-deception by what the world told him he was meant to be. Bankman-Fried's flimsy lies were a last gasping effort to cling to the fey glamour cast by the magic circle of the tech investment world, and to justify, to himself most of all, the sacrifices made over many years to give others what they wanted. These lies and the incompetence they imply do support, perversely, the essence of Bankman-Fried's primary self-defense, that, as he at one point planned to tell the US Congress, he simply, quote, fucked up. His apparent childish haplessness, in turn, suggests greater blame for the many who let him rise. Bankman-Fried's ineptitude, ignorance, and indiscipline were on display for insiders far before it all came crashing down.
So that's a really interesting passage. I mean, so just to be clear, I mean, he's been trying to get a retrial. He's trying to get the conviction thrown out, and he's still making exactly this.
Yeah, and on last week, Monday, his appeal hearing happened in the second district in SDNY up in town, and I'm going to get her name wrong, but I think his appeals lawyer is Andrea Shapiro. She's a very famous appeals lawyer, and they spent, I'm sure, tons of money that I don't understand where it came from to have her go up and echo this argument that it was all margin trading. I mean, it was quite stunning to listen to the tape, actually. They have a recording of this appeals hearing you can go listen to, and she just runs down the exact theory, completely already disproven at trial, that A, all of this money was borrowed legitimately, and B, we should give him credit for taking all of this stolen money and making good investments with it.
And they were trying to claim that it was a bank, that there was simply a run on the bank, that there wasn't enough deposits to meet all the withdrawal demands.
Yeah, run on the bank is the language that was used very widely in sort of the autopsy of this situation from certain figures. And it's very deceptive because a bank makes money by lending out your deposits, and that's what it's supposed to do. But a crypto exchange, you are promised that your assets will be custodied, not lent out, but protected and held safely. And that's the thing that you sign up for. That's what you expect an exchange to do.
Right. So, I mean, many criminals, when they get into a situation where they're about to be going to prison, will change their case. They'll show some contrition, some guilt. But, I mean, S.B.F. never did that. He stuck to the story that he was a hapless genius who just kind of got in over his head.
Yeah, and you know, I quoted Judge Kaplan, who, you know, I sat through the entire trial. It was about 30, it was exactly 30 days. I think we were pointing this out. The trial actually ended in 2023, also on this day, November 11th. So this is also the second anniversary of his conviction today. Yeah, I you know, it's nuanced because I think he made some gestures of contrition or regret at least, but at the end of the trial, Judge Kaplan at sentencing definitely was very explicit that, at least in his perception, Sam never expressed contrition. And he certainly, since his conviction, has basically, both publicly and I believe through kind of private back channels where I think he's paying people to echo a certain line somehow, he's continued to stick with this story of it was all legitimate, and also somehow it's the bankruptcy lawyer's fault. It's another big one.
So, but what's interesting about this book and about this whole case, and I think what's so interesting about what you've written here, is that this wasn't simply like a bad person doing bad things and not admitting to it. I mean, there was a kind of a guiding philosophy that led him to behave the way he did and to not admit to what he did, and that was some version of Techno-Utopianism, which is what you call it in the book, which has many different strains in it. Just explain what you mean by Techno-Utopianism and how did that contribute to his downfall, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I think the landscape has changed quite significantly since this happened over the last 3 years. Obviously, we've had kind of a great rise in the influence of what I would call broadly techno-utopian thought in U.S. politics in particular. Obviously, Elon Musk, very much a techno-utopian. He has said he has a lot of alignment with effective altruism, which is kind of the main philosophy that Bankman-Fried was motivated by. And essentially, we can get into it, but the real fundamental thing here is that effective altruism is a strain of what's known as utilitarianism, which is essentially the idea that if you really boil it down, the outcome of your actions is what matters ethically. That ethically, all you should concern yourself with is outcomes rather than rules. And so at trial, for example, we had Carolyn Ellison, a confessed co-conspirator, say that Sam had told her that she believed that FTX user deposits were a good source of capital to accelerate FTX's growth. So the rationale for all of this sort of illicit borrowing was, I am a good investor, therefore these people, even though they've told me they just want me to hold on to their money, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to invest it in venture investments, and I'm going to make all the money back. And one of the other, just to tack on, you know, there's so many troublesome parts of this, but a lot of the public rhetoric following the collapse of FTX has sort of been an attempt to claim that there was a full recovery by victims of this crime. One of the very gratifying things that happened in the hearing on Monday is that the federal prosecutor, Thane Wren, who was one of the three leads in the prosecution and argued for the appeal on Monday, he actually laid out into the official record for the first time from the prosecution's perspective this point that a lot of the people who lost assets, they were repaid at par dollar value at a point when the market was very low, and many of their assets have since gone up by on the order of 10x. And so even when there was a technical recovery under American bankruptcy law that went beyond the value on the claim date, these people are actually, in many cases, out millions or tens of millions of dollars that they would have now if Bankman-Fried had done what he promised and custodied their funds.
And he basically said that it's not stealing because they got their money back.
That's the argument that, again, people are trying to make, and that, again, Shapiro, his appeals lawyer, tried to make last Monday on appeal. And the fun part was listening to the appeal and hearing the appellate judges not buy it at all. But that is still what they're going with, incredibly.
We'll get right back to journalist David Morris on Afterwards from C-SPAN. Now back to journalist David Morris talking about his book, Stealing the Future, Sam Bankman-Fried, Elite Fraud, and the Cult of Techno-Utopia.
Okay. So, I mean, when I went to school, we learned about utilitarianism as this idea of the happiness of the greatest number, that the ends justify the means. It doesn't sound too bad to me. Like, why wouldn't you have a philosophy of helping as many people as possible? But you show very clearly in the book that this leads to real moral failings in both S.B.F. but also in his parents that were kind of pushing their sons.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say that, like, while it sounds good on the surface, utilitarianism has some really fundamental conceptual problems. And those are that it is a philosophy based on the idea that you can know the greatest good for all human beings alive across the world. And I think many people would agree that that's actually kind of not a realistic claim, that you can even have that knowledge about the total state of the world. Even more so, utilitarianism assumes that everybody has the same definition of what is good and what is right and what is, a positive outcome for people. And so, yeah, one of the things that I argue in the book is that utilitarianism from that perspective is sort of fundamentally authoritarian, in the sense that if you are the utilitarian, you are deciding what is good for everybody, and you're claiming the knowledge to, stake that position. There's another layer here, which is where we get into the techno-utopian angle, which is that in addition to utilitarianism, Sam and a lot of others in this sort of universe of movements believe in what's called long-termism. And this is where you look into, not just decades, but potentially centuries or even thousands of years into the future, and you base your decisions on these long-term outcomes for humanity. And the vision of humanity's future that these people have is a very specific one, based on interplanetary travel and colonization, the development of artificial general intelligence, and the ability to upload human minds to computers. And that third one in particular, there are arguments against the feasibility of any of these as genuine things that we can accomplish. But the idea that you can upload a human mind to a computer is both, sort of improbable for a lot of scientific reasons, and a very specific ideological position about just the way knowledge works. But to bring this back around, that long-termism, that very long horizon, if you're a utilitarian and a long-termist, what you're claiming is that you can predict the consequences of your actions thousands of years into the future on a population of trillions of humans living in your model spread across the entire universe. And the problem with that is that you actually can't predict any of those consequences, but in the course of trying to justify the actions that will bring about what you think are those future consequences, you can actually rationalize a lot of harms to individuals in the present. And Sam and FTX are, I think, a sterling example of that. He really thought he was doing the good for the long term, but wound up hurting a lot of people in the immediate present.
So if you're a long-termist, you're not thinking about next week and that some people might lose money. You're thinking about history and
the other really important example of long-termism right now, because you're seeing perhaps some ads for his book in the subway around here, is Eliezer Yudkowsky, the leader of the Machine Intelligence Research Institute and the head of what you would call the AI doomer brigade, the people who believe that we're going to achieve AGI and then it's going to destroy us all. And Yudkowsky and a lot of people affiliated with him have made arguments that seem to rationalize terrorism and violence in their quest to defeat this AI that doesn't exist yet. And so you get into a lot of, I'm going to do this extreme thing that by most moral standards would be objectionable or hurtful. But because I imagine a future where I'm stopping the Terminator, it's okay.
Right. So S.B.F. was motivated by this theory of utilitarianism and thinking about the kind of probabilistic outcomes of actions that he was making. And this all came from his parents that were very much like steeped in this philosophy, right?
Yeah, Barbara Fried in particular has described herself as something close to a die-hard or hardcore, both utilitarian and determinist, which is to say, she believes that humans don't have free will, which is another aspect of this constellation of beliefs.
They're just a subject of their environment.
Yeah, pretty much entirely. And it's interesting because she comes at this from what I think a lot of people would consider a liberal perspective, because she's mounting that argument specifically in pursuit of prison reform, and sort of this argument that, like, well, people aren't really responsible for their actions, therefore we should orient prison around sort of rehabilitation rather than punishment. She's very against punishment. And this is all stuff that she wrote before her son became one of the biggest criminals in history. So it's quite interesting and ironic from that perspective.
And how is effective altruism linked to utilitarianism, would you say?
So effective altruism specifically is focused on charitable giving. And they believe that using controlled trials, experiments, and things like that, you can kind of determine which nonprofit is saving the most lives per dollar, and then you maximize that donation. And the sort of classic example is bed nets for mosquitoes, which are very inexpensive to buy in parts of sub-Saharan Africa where they have problems with malaria, and they save a lot of lives. And so that's a very effective intervention. But one of the sort of more interesting things that I write about in the book is that, buying bed nets to stop malaria is a very effective intervention for saving lives. But they've done it so much that now these nets are being used widely in Africa and Southeast Asia for fishing. And because of the fine grain of the net, those fish nets actually catch eggs and hatchlings and destroy ecosystems where people are relying on the fish. And so I think it's a great example of the way that when you have this like maximizing experimental data dictated behavior, there are always unintended consequences and externalities that don't fit into your model or your equation.
But the argument for effective altruism is that we're not just spending money willy-nilly with philanthropy, right? It's just,
yeah. And there is a it started off as, I think, a fairly defensible position in terms of let's actually like look at the outcome. And there are some good examples of very ineffective nonprofit efforts that feel good, they look good on a pamphlet, but they don't actually help people that much, or maybe they even harm people. Those things do exist. And so that's kind of the deep irony here, is that it starts out as a relatively defensible position, and then partly because they sort of go into this long-termist thing where most effective altruists, or a lot of effective altruists now, are primarily or even exclusively concerned with far future concerns like asteroid strikes or the emergence of artificial general intelligence that wants to kill us all, and have diverted their efforts from actually helping people. And so that is kind of the sort of tragic irony of effective altruism, is that it basically, at its base, there is a certain sensibility to it, but it's been captured so thoroughly by Silicon Valley, by the billionaires who mostly fund it, that it has kind of become a little bit, I would say, perverted.
Right. So if this kind of philosophy that S.B.F. and his family espoused is so widespread in Silicon Valley, what does that mean for the future, do you think? I think
we're seeing it right now, and this is actually my next book, which is a lot of these principles also undergird, again, the development of artificial intelligence and the basically massive overspending that's going into something like OpenAI right now is actually largely premised on this fantasy, I'll just say it, that we're going to, by the way, if you look into the science, for anybody out there who hasn't done this, like, if you look into the way the human brain works, you actually cannot simulate it with a digital computer. It's literally impossible, and there are very compelling arguments for why artificial general intelligence, at least as an analog of human thought, is not achievable technically. But this is the premise that the effective altruists, the rationalists, and these other techno-utopian movements are kind of putting out there as this is the way we're going, and they have all of this huge inflow of investment into OpenAI in particular, and then for anybody who's paying attention, we now, as of last week, have Sam Altman of OpenAI saying that, well, we're not quite there yet, so I think we're going to need a little bit of that stimmy. I think we need some government stimulus to underwrite our far future creation of the God AI, and they've made themselves systemically important in a way that should scare all of us about where the market and development is going over the next, I'm going to say 6 months. So watch your portfolios, because these people are really doing it. They're running the game.
It's a matter of national security, of geopolitics.
Well, that's what they say.
Yeah.
That's the thing. If you believe that you're going to invent God, then it definitely becomes a matter of national security. And that's the narrative that they're trying to push.
All right. So just going back to the actual cryptocurrency industry, I mean, just talk about how impactful S.B.F. was when he was still running around, and how impactful his trial and prosecution was.
Well, I have a kind of a different. I have a complex answer here, because I came to CoinDesk in 2020.
Yeah.
Time does not have any meaning anymore. And I really did not know who S.B.F. was in 2020. I had been at Fortune, where I was reporting a lot about the development and distribution of COVID vaccines and writing about Tesla, and I was still kind of 1 foot in crypto, but not that attentive. And Bankman-Fried had founded a centralized exchange, which is probably one of the least interesting things you can do in the cryptocurrency world. And so I didn't pay that much attention to him. I think his importance is interesting. He did help launch a chain called Solana that is actually still important. But one of the things that actually came out in the hearing on Monday that, it's a little bit embarrassing. Sometimes you put these pieces together too late for them to be in the book. But again, Thane Wren, one of the prosecutors, said, and this is such a critical critical thing, the means of the embezzlement that happened here was in part that FTX customers deposited a bunch of cash, US dollars, with the exchange. And then, one of the sort of steps that they omitted was they never actually bought the cryptocurrency that people believed they were ordering on FTX, and therefore those dollars just actually went straight into these venture investments that Sam Bankman-Fried was punting on. And that's interesting.
So they weren't even buying and selling crypto.
So this is what's interesting, is that we actually had obviously a huge run-up in the crypto market from 2020 to 2022. And it seems now, in retrospect, that FTX was actually not pumping the market, because they were not actually going out and buying the assets that they told their customers they were buying. And I think that there was at least some part of my brain at the time that was like, oh, we're having this market run-up, or we had this market run-up because there was this fraud that was doing sort of illegitimate things. And there was still a lot of that in the market, but it was quite interesting to hear that no, FTX was not actually going out and making these purchases. So like that market run-up, at least FTX did not have like that direct influence on it of like double counting things that it seemed like they might have been at the time.
Right. And S.B.F. was a national figure. He was on the front page of Fortune, on the front page of CoinDesk, of many other publications. He was kind of the golden boy.
Yeah.
And
he went to Washington at least 3 times, I think, something like that. He spoke before Congress. He was held up as the model of how, he was the adult in the room of how crypto should be regulated.
It's quite ironic now, because
Right.
at the time crypto was struggling for acceptance, and he was seen as a kind of safe kind of conveyor of the future. So that's why he was so acceptable on in
and
DC.
a lot of that, one of the things that we didn't find out until later, his image was very central to that, and it was very carefully crafted. So you'll probably mostly remember there were these photos of him with his crazy hair flying out. at trial, we heard Carolyn Ellison say, you know, he knew that his hair increased his salary at Jane Street where he worked. He knew that his hair was a very important part of his image. They actually made plans for the FTX headquarters in the Bahamas to be laid out as a building in the shape of Sam's hair. But not just that, he actually had them trade in luxury cars that they had initially bought for the executives for cheaper cars because he wanted to convey that effective altruist image.
He drove a Corolla, right?
The what?
He had a Corolla.
He drove a Corolla, and Ellison had a Honda Civic. I believe at certain points they described the place where all of these executives were living together as a dorm. The dorm was, in fact, a $10 million Bahamian penthouse. And so you see all of these, there are these very intentional efforts by S.B.F. to, I think, present himself both as sort of this naive innocent, this kind of man-child who, another really interesting example is that when one of the times he went to testify before Congress, he did so with his shoes untied. And that's where he kind of gives the game away, right? Because it's you're 29 years old. You know how to tie your shoes. And not only do you know that, but you really know that when you go before Congress, you should probably do that. And so this is where he's being very performative about, I compare it to Mark Zuckerberg, right? Zuckerberg was the first Silicon Valley executive to wear a hoodie in the boardroom. He broke that barrier. And then Bankman-Fried is the trailing edge of that, where not only am I going to wear a hoodie, I don't bathe and I sleep on a beanbag, and that is the image of the tech genius that we've arrived at, and that's what I'm, that was his marketing.
And he famously went into a meeting with Bill Clinton in shorts, right, in those khaki shorts.
And again, we had even at the time an interview with an executive who worked with him who was yeah, we intentionally wore shorts because that was part of the image that we were trying to present.
Right. And so when he was prosecuted in 2022, this was terrible for the crypto industry, and it's taken crypto industry 2 years to come back from that.
Yeah. Well, I think it did take about 2 years. It's been about a year now, yeah. And it was a reputational thing. It was a lot of they blew up a lot of other people because they had made fraudulent loans or taken loans on a fraudulent basis from lenders for example, Genesis. I don't know, we can talk about CoinDesk a little bit.
Sure.
But yeah, we blew ourselves up.
Yeah, there was kind of an irony at CoinDesk because we were the publication that was breaking these stories about SBF, but the parent company of CoinDesk, which was Digital Currency Group, or DCG, was itself impacted by those stories, and you can maybe explain.
Yeah, so there was a trading shop under DCG. CoinDesk was another company under DCG, and Genesis got blown up after FTX collapsed. They lost, I don't know, I'm going to guess $300 million. I'm making that up. But basically, it created a crisis at our parent company, DCG, that then meant CoinDesk had to be sold off to a new owner who has since become a rather poor steward of the institution. But all because, but more to the point, I lost my job. Michelle, I don't remember when you got laid off, but so yeah, I mean, we lost our jobs because of the reporting that we did about SBF. And on the plus side, I will say, not usually a huge fan, but the New York Times did a profile of us. New York Magazine did a profile of us, so we got at least some publicity out of losing our jobs.
We'll get right back to journalist David Morris on Afterwards from C-SPAN. Now back to journalist David Morris talking about his book, Stealing the Future, Sam Bankman-Fried, Elite Fraud, and the Cult of Techno-Utopia.
Okay, just one more question before we turn it over to the audience. I mean, how much of a legacy does SBF have in the crypto industry today? I mean, are there other young kids going around with these crazy ideas of utilitarianism?
Well, I think in crypto his name is as bad as it could possibly be. And it's been very interesting watching the reaction to a lot of these efforts to reframe the story, to get him a pardon or get him off. The crypto industry, I don't think there's a single more hated person. Even like other fraudsters of the same generation, like who were the Three Arrows guys? Kyle Davies and
I can't remember.
Suzu,
yeah.
who are also complete psychopaths, but like they have a better shot of rehabilitating their image than Sam. The more interesting question, I think, is with effective altruism and this broader like world of the Silicon Valley ideologies. And effective altruism is also in a really bad place as a movement, largely thanks to Sam. I mean, the fallout was actually incredibly broad. Will McCaskill is the guy who is one of the two heads of effective altruism. He brought Sam into the movement. He has stepped down from almost all of his positions. He was funneled about $36 million worth of largely stolen FTX funds to funnel into effective altruism groups. Some of that was given back, most of it grudgingly. So he lost his stature. Another sort of second order consequence was Nick Bostrom is a guy who's very affiliated with the sort of techno-utopian world. He, to a significant extent, invented the idea of hostile or unaligned AI. In parallel with the collapse of FTX, investigators discovered some unfortunate comments that he had made in the past. Oxford ultimately defunded what was called the Future of Humanity Institute, which was one of these long-termist think tanks that Bostrom had founded. So a lot of people had their reputations deeply damaged by their affiliation with Sam Bankman-Fried. And I should point out it's well-deserved, because one of the things that we found out afterwards was that in 2018, there was actually a rebellion inside of Alameda Research, because a lot of people who were there at the time, again, 4 years before what became the FTX collapse, people who were at Alameda Research when it was founded were talking about the fact that there is no accounting here, the money is going everywhere. Sam is having sex with his executives, which he kept doing, apparently. And that was ignored, including by Will McCaskill and other effective altruist leaders who were informed of some of the concerns at the time. So, there's some gray areas there, but you could argue that effective altruist leaders participated in a cover-up that ultimately led to the FTX catastrophe.
Definitely a lot of people to blame. Who would like to ask a question?
Pam, go for it. Oh.
Okay. Well, first of all, David, your grasp of the subject is absolutely amazing. You've done an excellent job explaining it, and I've learned a lot, and so I have a question that may be a little bit simplistic.
Please.
Probably a lot. So, if I'm understanding correctly, if they weren't investing, if they weren't actually buying the cryptocurrency that they were claiming why did the markets fluctuate like that if that wasn't why? If they were actually were not buying these assets?
Right. I mean, yeah. So this is the sort of the argument that crypto is real, is that FTX was a bad actor in this market, but there was still a huge market happening outside of FTX, and a lot of it was. I'm not going to say like it was all honest, but a lot of it was an honest market of people trading and using these assets, and that kept the activity going, sort of, even though FTX, this one relatively small, I mean, FTX was not that big, really, relative to the size of the larger market, I think it's fair to say. And so they were really just kind of like piggybacking on activity that was happening elsewhere. And, the assets they were trading were also being traded on a bunch of different other venues, so the prices were set elsewhere, essentially.
That makes sense, because I was just sitting there trying to put my head around that. And the other thing, this artificial general intelligence, just so that I'm understanding, is that like maybe a computer like waking up, like there?
This is the singularity.
Life?
This is again, this is the next book, and these are like, you have to take a couple hops to connect this to effective altruism, but it's very connected. This idea that, yeah, computers, we're going to invent an artificial intelligence so good that it's both conscious, like an actual, being, and also smarter than humans. Smarter than humans is kind of key to this whole
Smarter
thesis.
than the whole of human intelligence.
Well, smarter than humans and smarter than everybody, which, once you're doing make-em-ups, you can really make them up. And so that's the idea, yeah. That it's like the computer becomes, and I said God, and that actually is kind of a significant and literal part of their belief, is that the AGI will attain a kind of godlike intelligence. And you'll hear Sam Altman, different Sam, perhaps the same cycle, saying that once we hit AGI, we will solve all human sicknesses, we will solve all economic problems, we'll solve climate change, which is convenient because they're boiling the oceans right now, with the AGI servers. And so these are all of these like far future, we're gonna do it, therefore we have to make these shortcuts now, make these investments now, get these government subsidies now, because I swear to God, Mom, I promise, in 3 years we're gonna have AGI. In 5 years we're gonna invent God and we're gonna cure cancer. That is the like long-termist promise, and the way that they're getting people to give them money now for things that they haven't done yet.
Hi, thank you. You create a really fascinating and really clear vision of the techno-utopia and the basis of that in Bankman-Fried and his mother's vision. And I just wonder, is there a nexus, do you see a nexus between this the rise of the techno-utopia idea and our own like federal government and the oligarchs that support that government, or that are seem to be behind it or involved in it?
Yeah, I mean, let's be really clear. I believe that techno-utopianism, writ broadly, is a slightly obfuscated fascist movement. And that's despite the fact that a lot of the people involved with it probably think of themselves as like democratic liberals. They're in this kind of like, control space of, we believe we can do the math to figure everything out. And, as I said, Elon Musk is one of the big, he's perhaps the most prominent adherent of these ideas. Peter Thiel is another very big one. And obviously they have huge influence in the government right now. And so you'll see things like the sort of more friendly regulations, perhaps for AGI, certainly for crypto, which we have mixed feelings about. And we also have the effective accelerationism is another sort of term that these people adopt. And there's some, we won't get into accelerationism, but the fundamental idea is deregulate everything, get rid of all the rules, let technology advance freely, and therefore we're going to get to utopia. So like literally the government that we have right now, their deregulatory agenda is driven by to some degree by techno-utopian thinking.
Right, so it's sort of along the lines that you were saying before about deciding for everybody what is good for everybody is a kind of fascism.
Yeah, and specifically this idea that if we have no controls on technology, it will inevitably lead in a good direction.
Right.
That is
that's always
kind of
been
core. True. It's really worked out so far for us,
It's kind of market forces for technology.
Yeah, and it's also significant that the EA people really believe in market forces as a source of information about the future. So we now have one of the things that's happened recently is that we have prediction markets that are legal in the United States. Prediction markets were invented by a guy named Robin Hanson, who worked for DARPA. He's still around. He's very much identified with the effective altruism and rationalist movement. And it's this idea that if you have people, you've probably heard about polymarket. If you have people betting on different outcomes, that is theoretically a good way to get information about what's going to happen. but it also becomes this very sort of specific crutch for people who think that the market is the source of all truth, and it has various. The other thing I will say about the sort of authoritarian and oligarchical connections here is that effective altruism, the specific idea that Will MacAskill presented to Sam Bankman-Fried at a coffee shop outside MIT in 2012 was what's called earn to give. And this is one of the EA concepts, which is if you are a person who's talented in a few specific fields, including finance, maybe the most effective thing that you can do for the future of humanity is earn as much money as possible. Even if, in the course of earning that money, you maybe aren't actually doing something that's good for the world. Because you're then going to take that money, you're going to give it back, and that's going to be your contribution. So one of the really interesting things about Sam is that there's some indication that he was not actually good at very much except gambling. He has spoken a lot about how much he hated reading books. The other excerpt that I was considering reading tonight was about how much he hates books. And he also, turns out, he went to MIT thinking he would be a physics researcher. Turns out he wasn't actually good at physics either, despite having sort of this mathematics background. He was kind of an indifferent student his entire life who got leveled up into elite schools kind of just because of his economic background. And did not actually wind up becoming a genius. Let's put it that way.
More questions?
Thank you. So I was a history minor, and one thing that all authoritarian regimes have is like cult of personality. I unfortunately don't have a copy of your book, but I was wondering if you touched on that at all, about kind of, we have a picture of Mao Zedong in China, and then we have S.B.F. building a building that looks like him.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. This is kind of one of the points of the book is that I've spent a lot of time not just writing about Sam Bankman-Fried, but investigating and writing about frauds in general. And one of the things that's really shocking to me, or has been shocking to me over the years, is that when you're sitting there trying to explain to somebody how they've been defrauded, they are very resistant to getting that message. And the essential argument that I make in the book, and it's not that complicated or advanced, but we have these heroes of capitalism. They are heroes, and we want to follow them. And Elon Musk obviously has the most insane cult of personality of probably anybody alive right now. Beyond Mao, honestly. I think Elon has transcended. But Bankman-Fried had a very strong cult of personality, both kind of in the public in terms of people willing to invest in him, and also privately. He had this inner circle of people who shared his philosophical beliefs, who were willing to participate in multi-billion-dollar fraud because they trusted him. And there was this inner group of people who were really helping him out, and it was all ideological. It was all because they had committed to this thing called effective altruism, and they believed that Sam was kind of the avatar of these values. But yeah, obviously he was on magazine covers, and the thing that's very particularly infuriating is that he knew that the reason he was getting on magazine covers was not because he had founded. Plenty of people. I don't think Brian Armstrong has ever been on the cover of Fortune magazine, and he's the founder of Coinbase, the very large domestic crypto exchange. The reason Sam Bankman-Fried got on the cover of Fortune, even though Brian Armstrong, who has been running a successful business for a decade, never has been, is because he made a big deal about his charity giving. He was like, my charity and political giving, I'm going to give $1 billion to Democrats, which, by the way, was a number that he pulled completely out of his ass.
He was the biggest donor in that cycle, right?
He was the biggest donor, but he just kind of made up a future number, which is they're very good at making up future numbers. I think his total overall wound up being 200 million or less before he crashed out. And so, yeah, the cult of personality is very real. And my argument is that Bankman-Fried had such success because he's presenting this image. He's young. He's a relatively young guy. People used his youth to try and apologize for him, but he was in his late 20s, early 30s, relatively young. And then he has this promise that like, yeah, we're all going to make a ton of money, but then we're also going to fix all the problems. So like if you're just a pure capitalist, I think people have cooled on that idea a little bit. But if you mix in just a little bit of do-goodery, you can get on the cover of Fortune. And he really played it like a harp from hell.
Thank you. It's really good insight.
Any more questions?
One more?
So this just kind of speaks to maybe where the future of all of this is going. Now that crypto has had this huge scandal, and everybody and their mom is getting into it, and you have people who are just known as, and I don't want to get into politics here, but what do you do about government culpability, helping with the negligence, or just greed? Donald Trump now has jumped into the game. And
Right.
he's just making money hand over fist, and he's not pretending that, oh, I'm, this, effective altruism. No, I'm just greedy. So I'm just wondering, where do you see that? What do you see? What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think that it is there are two things I think that, so Sam actually made all of these political donations and was very effective at getting political influence for the time before he killed himself. And that, I think, became a model for the crypto industry more broadly, which has then, since Sam, in the last couple of years, and obviously in the run-up to the election, lobbied very heavily, spent a ton of money. I think, was it Coinbase or Kraken that gave a bunch to the ballroom remodeling that's happening right now?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Coinbase sponsored the U.S. Army parade the other day, for instance.
Right, that was a great choice. And so you do have these crypto companies that are now very influential in politics, just from having money to give. And I think that Ben can check me here, but the irony, of course, is that I think both of us believe that crypto actually is a real thing. Like, it's not a scam in itself. Sam Bankman-Fried's fraud could have had nothing to do with crypto at all, and it still would have been the same fraud. He just embezzled a bunch of money. He didn't do any
Could have been embezzling anything.
stocks, whatever. He didn't do any crazy hacking or anything really. And so these crypto companies, and I mean, this is the real irony we've been watching crypto frauds happening for 10 years now, and it's if you had done it honestly, you actually would have come out way ahead of where you were because you committed a crime. But regardless, the point is these crypto companies have a ton of money. They're using it to influence politics, and some of it is, I think, good. Some of it actually is there is a need to regulate these systems. They exist. They're real. But obviously, we are also at the same time in the crime is legal era of American politics, and that's visible everywhere. And I think that in a weird way, S.B.F. was the last guy to go to jail for these crimes. And I think that in some sense, we are going to look back on it with nostalgia, because I think there's a lot of it going on that's not getting prosecuted right now, obviously. And you pointed to one case that I won't comment on.
Sorry, one more question.
Please.
Well, one thing I remember about S.B.F. before the collapse is that he was very pro-regulation when basically every other crypto founder was not. Do you think the fact that he was so pro-regulation, we should be regulated, we'll work with Congress to be regulated, kind of duped more people and
I'm going to actually give you I'm going to give you the answer, and then I'm going to drop some insane lore, which is, I mean, the real answer is yes. Sam Bankman-Fried specifically had policy proposals that benefited him. He actually wanted regulation that some critics argued would have cut off what we call DeFi, which is actually distributed exchanges and lending and things like that, would have stopped that so that FTX, as a centralized exchange controlled by one guy, could continue making all this money. And I think a lot of people, the furthest fringe of this conspiracy theory, I would say, is that Bankman-Fried wanted to change the laws so that he controlled so much of the market through FTX that he could cover up all the money that he had stolen. So he was actually going to Washington to get the laws changed in such a way that he could cover up the crimes that he was actually committing while he was going to Washington. So I think that is one element here. And the other thing, this is the lore that I'll drop, because he was fighting against DeFi platforms like Uniswap and other analogs. But going way back to 2019, 2020, Ben, I'm not even sure I've talked to you about this. There was a fork of Uniswap, which is an exchange, a decentralized exchange that operates on the blockchain. There was a fork of Uniswap back in 2019, 2020 called SushiSwap. And they did what's called a vampire attack. They gave a lot of incentives for customers from Uniswap to go over to SushiSwap, this clone, DeFi exchange, doing swaps, doing all of the same stuff that FTX would have done. It basically failed, blew up, but it was clearly an attack on a decentralized exchange that had been established and was growing and was becoming a competitor to the centralized exchanges. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this publicly, but I have spoken to sources who have strong suspicions that SushiSwap was actually founded by and controlled by Sam Bankman-Fried and was intended to attack their DeFi competitors to make FTX stronger, which is the kind of thing that you can do when you're on incredible amounts of amphetamines.
Maybe that's a good place to leave it, just for the amphetamines.
It really is.
Well, David, you're an amazing writer, amazing person. This book is amazing. You should all read it. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thanks to all of you for coming.
Thanks for listening to Afterwards from C-SPAN. You can watch more conversations with authors like this one every Sunday on C-SPAN 2's Book TV. Book TV and all the C-SPAN networks are now available to watch live on YouTube TV. Learn more at tv.youtube.com. And next week on Afterwards, Veranda Montgomery will talk about the botanical knowledge developed by African Americans and her book, When Trees Testify: Science, Wisdom, History, and America's Black Botanical Legacy.